Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man gets a test DNA kit for his birthday, discovers that someone in his family gave him a rare condition. So, would you believe? I got an invitation with my DNA test.
For my 31st birthday, my friends got me a heritage DNA test. One of those where you send a sample and get an approximate percentage of what makes up your background. I don't think there was anything in particular that made them gift it to me, though. I think they ordered one for themselves. Got a 2-for-1 kind of deal. But still, I figured it'd be fun to check out. My biological grandpa died when my dad was very young, and my grandmother remarried long before I was born. So I was never told a lot about that side of the family. I'd always been a bit of a sickly child, so I've been wary about looking too closely at my family and health history. But I figured this couldn't hurt, so I filled out the form, provided the sample, and sent it on its way. Then I just sort of forgot about it. When I finally got the results, it came with a few surprising revelations. While the majority of my heritage was entirely predictable, there was an 11% splash of something called the Northern Scandinavian Blue Hill Tribe. I asked my parents about it. While my mother had no idea what the Blue Hill Tribe was, she was pretty sure it wasn't from her side of the family. My dad was equally confused. Sure, he didn't know much about his biological father, but he knew for a fact that the man was from Oklahoma. His mom, on the other hand, was Minnesotan. Dad got curious and ordered his own test within the hour. As I ended the call and boxed the packaging up, something fell out. A sturdy envelope made of thin navy blue cardboard and sealed with a sunflower emblem. It had a mild chemical smell to it, like a sweet ammonia. At first I thought it was going to be some kind of special offer, much like what got me that test in the first place. But after turning it over, I could see it was addressed directly to me in handwritten cursive that read, "Dear Daniel, congratulations on your recent result. As part of our further effort to explore the diverse world of unified heritage, and in cooperation with our various multinational partners, we would like to extend an invite to descendants of the for an eventful day of education, connectivity, and celebration. Please consider this invitation and review the enclosed details at personal link using your login credentials. We hope to see you there." I didn't know exactly what to make of it, but I decided to check it out. And holy hell, it reeked of scam. Here's what it offered: a fully paid 3-day stay at a hotel in Manchester, New Hampshire, free entry to the company-sponsored Heritage Celebration event, alongside other members of both the Blue Hill Tribe, but also other unique and diverse backgrounds. There were several groups listed, mostly hailing from the Scans, the Carpathians, and the Ural Mountains. I would have to pay for the trip to get there, though, and they were clear about food, drink, and room service not being included, but all in all, it sounded too good to be true. After several hours of trying to find my way through customer service websites, I finally got a hold of an actual service rep over the phone. At first, they seemed to have no idea what I was talking about. But when I referenced a personal case number at the bottom of the envelope, they referred me to a special events manager. This manager, in turn, confirmed everything.
I know.
They laughed.
I know how it sounds, but this is actually a sort of golden ticket thing. It's a biennial event and part of a charity effort, so there's a tax incentive for us as well. If you can make it, I'd recommend checking it out. We got some event photos on our website for reference.
I did as she suggested, and I gotta say, I was convinced. I accepted. My flight arrived on the morning of the first event day, about 3 hours ahead of opening. I had an uneventful early check-in, spotting the locked doors through the lobby. There were a few posters marking the Heritage Celebration event, and there were already a couple of people roaming the halls outside, but I decided to catch my breath a bit before the doors opened. I got to my room and clocked out for a couple of hours. I double-checked the event schedule on my phone, making mental notes of the various talks, guided tours, luncheons, dinners, and get-togethers. It was a full 2-day event. I was surprised at just how much there was to do, considering the event was intended for no more than a couple of hundred people at most. Still, I couldn't complain. But just as I drifted off for a nap, I got a notification on my phone, a text from my dad. Apparently, he'd recently gotten his results back. Strangely enough, he didn't have any percentage of the Northern Scandinavian Blue Hill tribe in his genetic makeup. Maybe my mom wasn't as Southern as she thought. Once the doors opened, there were about 100 people walking about. Some looked like average Joe Nobodies. Others were clearly some kind of corporate representative. I could tell at least 6 different accents, just by walking around, and a couple of foreign languages. There were a few booths to check out, mostly advertising various new services and products by the company behind the DNA test, but also one that was just information about various forgotten or unusual tribes. Going through the pamphlets, I couldn't find one about the Blue Hill tribe, so I decided to ask the service rep behind the counter.
Blue Hill?
He said, raising an eyebrow. I'm not sure. Another rep whispered something in his ear, and he nodded.
Right.
He corrected.
We don't have any reading material on that subject, but, I think there's an info session. Should be part of the Tribes of the North meetup.
I double-checked the schedule again and made my way to a couple of events. The Tribes of the North meetup was an after-dinner event. Part of the late-night off-hours socializing thing they tried to get going. I spent the afternoon listening in on various other topics, trying to pass the time. There was a speaker on the topic of nomadic North American tribes, as well as a workshop about forgotten languages. It was all interesting in its own way. But I found myself drifting away just after lunchtime. I had to take a rest around 3 p.m. because of an upset stomach, a relic from my sickly past. Later, I took a walk around town and had a decent meal at a local restaurant before I headed back to the hotel. I was a few minutes late to the meetup. There were about 24 people there in total. We didn't really have any common features. We had different skin, hair, eyes, and we were all from different parts of the U.S. A couple of them were Canadian, and there was this one guy from the Philippines. It was pretty clear who the event organizer was, though. A chipper young woman in a black pantsuit with a company logo pin and a digital clipboard. She went around the room confirming that everyone was a member of the Blue Hill. I overheard an older woman mentioning she was categorized as over 30%, while a young man mentioned he only had 5%. The young woman cleared her throat and excused herself, calmly demanding the attention of the room.
Thank you all so much for coming.
She smiled.
I'm sure you have 100 questions, and we thought this might be a good time to get to know one another a little better. Please follow me.
We were led through a corridor to a smaller open room, a sort of meeting space in the back. They'd turned down the lights a bit and set out a couple of platters of cheeses, crackers, and some alcohol-free sparkling wine. There were a couple of people there already. I was about to spark up a conversation with a 50-year-old man who looked as confused as me when the chipper young woman took hold of the room again. She directed our attention to a man that I can't for the life of me remember the name of. Weston or Wesley, I think. He in turn welcomed us and encouraged us to indulge in the various snacks scattered throughout the room. Then he introduced us to the topic of the evening, the Blue Hill tribe.
If there is one thing I'm certain of,
He started.
it is that every single person in this room has had a serious medical condition at some point in their life. Something unusual. Does anyone mind sharing an example?
I didn't speak up about the severe ulcers I had as a kid and the partial transplant I had to get. But there were others who openly shared various issues. Heart valve issues, cornea transplants, nerve damage. Everyone seemed to have something. The man just nodded, as if expecting this.
This is sadly a common attribute of people with lineage dating back to the Blue Hill tribes. So let's take a closer look at the history and customs of these unique people. And while we do, please feel free to mark yourself in the attendance sheet.
He continued to speak of a group of people native to the northern Scandinavian mountain ranges. There were dates, locations, an approximate number of tribal members, and a few other sparse details. I marked the form while I waited, realizing pretty early on that what he was saying was suspiciously generic. He spoke of leather and bone craftsmanship, and a belief in mountain spirits, but there were no details, no references, no pictures, drawings, or artifacts. I noticed a lot of people around the room paying close attention and not really thinking too much about what they were filling out on the attendance sheet. But I took a closer look. Our names were already on the sheet, so we were only supposed to make a check mark. However, there were also percentages printed on the side, corresponding to the percentage of heritage we had in common with this tribe. I recognized my 11% and the 30% of the old woman. There was also a series of other numbers that I didn't immediately recognize. When I thought no one was looking, I snapped a picture of it just in case. After a 15-minute lecture on the history of the Blue Hill tribe, I came to the realization that I hadn't actually learned anything. The locations and dates were so generic that there was no way to fact-check it, and there were no details as to their various customs and crafts. Looking around the room, I noticed the chipper young woman was off in the corner, whispering to someone on her Bluetooth earpiece, her eyes scanning the crowd with a serious demeanor. There was a man in a suit by the doorway taking pictures with his phone, and a hotel functionary offering refreshments being turned away. This was clearly a private matter, and of great interest to the company, for some reason. I snapped to attention as the room applauded. The lecture came to an end, and we were given some time to mingle, but not without another reminder to make a mark on the attendance sheet. I chatted a bit with a few people, but it all felt a bit forced. Just a few words here and there. I got the impression that none of us had very much in common. No one seemed to have any idea where that part of their heritage actually came from. There was this one guy who had studied his genealogy extensively, who insisted that it was strictly impossible for him to be even partly Scandinavian.
I've mapped out every family member for 6 generations.
He scoffed.
There's no way.
As more and more people filtered out into the night, I decided to lag a bit to see what was being said behind closed doors. I wasn't sneaking around on all fours like a spy, just lingering a little too long on the other side of a bathroom door or stopping to conveniently check my email near a hushed discussion. I picked up a few bits and pieces, discussions about our percentages, for example. There was also talk about a second event the following night, and how it wasn't officially on the schedule. They referred to it as a sort of closing ceremony. There was also a short talk about inviting a few of us to a private meeting. I heard 2 people squabbling a bit about the details, and I didn't catch much of it, but I clearly heard a sentence as they finished. "Just get the right ones," one of them snarled.
None of that 3% shit.
I didn't like that, not one bit. Returning to my room, I decided to pack up my things. I had a bad feeling about whatever they were up to, and I couldn't help but to imagine that they had something planned. Maybe it was all a scam after all, or something worse. Either way, I wasn't eager to find out. I couldn't find a reasonably priced flight back home until early morning. It was almost 12 hours away, but I figured I could pull an all-nighter and get out as soon as the sun rose. I could wait a few hours at the airport if need be. With my bags packed and ready, I settled in for a long night. It was somewhere around 2 a.m. when I found myself staring at late-night TV and scrolling on my phone. As a salesman prattled on in the background, a stray thought hit me. I decided to take another look at the attendance sheet photo. There was a set of numbers by each person that didn't make immediate sense to me. I brought out a pen and paper and started breaking them down. First in sets of 2, then individually, then sets of 3, trying to find some pattern or idea. It took me a little longer than I cared to admit to recognize something. The last 4 numbers correlated to one pattern, floor and room number. That left 4 other numbers, which, when broken down into pairs of 2, correlated to a month and day. The date itself didn't make much sense, though. For me, it was a few days after I'd sent in my first sample. Then it hit me. It was probably the day they received the sample. Taking a closer look at the percentages, I could see that everyone with a 9% heritage or lower were situated on lower floors, while those with 10% and higher all seemed to have the higher. Maybe there was a sort of unspoken threshold happening at 10% and up. Could that be what they referred to when they said to get the ripe ones? As I scrolled through various images from previously hosted charity events, I got a notification. My phone warned me that my camera app had unexpectedly closed. Strange, seeing as how it wasn't open to begin with. A bad feeling settled in my stomach. I was on the hotel Wi-Fi. Could they be monitoring our activities? I considered the option that I was just being tired and paranoid. That might very well be the case, but on the other hand, I'd heard what I'd heard. It was stressing me out, further upsetting my already sensitive stomach. I could feel a tinge of pain and decided to go get some ice. It might sound like a stupid home remedy thing, but sucking on an ice cube has always helped me calm down. I followed the corridor, got myself some ice in a bucket, and returned to my room. As I was about to round the corner, I recognized a familiar sound. My hotel room door being closed and locked from the outside. Peeking around the corner, I noticed two people dressed in black disappearing down the hall, mumbling quietly to one another. Returning to my room, I couldn't help but to second-guess myself. Had the bathroom door always been open? Was the same channel on the TV playing? Had someone moved my bags? It was hard to tell. That's how I spent the night, wondering. My heart sometimes skipped a beat as I thought I noticed something new, but ultimately, I couldn't find anything immediately threatening. I pulled out my phone battery just in case and kept it in my other pocket. No one would be tracking me anytime soon. I messed up my bed to make it look like I had slept in it, even though I spent most of my time in the bathroom, ready to lock the door and call the police. I nodded off a few times, but eventually, the sun broke the horizon. A few rays of sunshine slipping in through the frosted bathroom window. I got my bags and left. One nervous elevator ride later, I slapped down the hotel key on the reception and headed for the exit without elaborating. I accidentally made eye contact with the hotel security guard by the exit, who gave me a curious side-eye.
Sir?
He asked. I stopped briefly and excused myself. He held up a hand.
Sir, may I speak with you?
He repeated. I have an appointment, I smiled. Sorry.
It won't take long.
He smiled.
Right this way.
Looking at the silver-colored revolving door that could get me out of there, I considered my options. I could make a break for it, or I could just see what this was about. I decided to just talk to the man, banking hard on it not being anything serious. In hindsight, I should have gone for the goddamn door. I was taken to a small room right next to the reception. There, he asked to see my phone. I showed him, although the battery was still out.
My supervisor had a couple of questions.
He said,
She's just outside. Won't be a minute.
I'm sorry, but I gotta... He pocketed my phone, smiled, and stepped out of the room. But it wasn't an ordinary service personnel kind of smile. It was almost apologetic. Like he knew he'd landed me in some kind of trouble. And through the door came the chipper young woman from the previous night. She wasn't as chipper this time. She didn't sit down, instead opting to stand on the opposite side of the room with her arms crossed. For a solid minute, she just stood there, considering what to say. Finally, she let out a sigh and took a step forward. I felt like a scorned schoolboy, being dragged to the principal's office.
Are you leaving early?
She asked.
Would be a shame to miss the get-together tonight.
I'm thankful to have been a part of this, I said, but I really ought to get going.
Oh?
She feigned surprise.
Family emergency?
That's private, I said. I could still hear hotel personnel outside and figured she didn't want to make a scene. I leaned back in my chair, confident and quiet. She didn't take that too well.
I think it'd be for the best if you stayed a little longer.
She continued, I don't think I will.
I don't think there's much to debate.
I'm sorry, but you have no... She slammed her fist on the table and stared me down, unblinking and furious. There was a slight tremble in her movement. There was no way those outside didn't hear us, and yet no one moved a muscle. Perhaps she was in more control than I'd anticipated.
I think you're gonna stick around for a while.
She snarled.
Or we're gonna have a problem. You wanna have a problem with me?
No, I said, shaking my head. I don't.
Then you're gonna shut the fuck up and play along.
I was dumbstruck. There was no ambiguity here. She was outright threatening me. I could barely understand why. Maybe she'd seen something on my phone while I was connected to the hotel Wi-Fi. Or maybe they'd noticed me spying. Perhaps they saw me pondering the attendance sheet, I don't know. Either way, they weren't taking any chances. I didn't see that hotel security guard again. Instead, they put me in a room with a very quiet man in a suit. He didn't answer any questions, and he wasn't much for small talk. All he did was stand outside the room, checking in on me as soon as I made a noise. I spent all day in that room, this small 10 by 14 feet room, with little more than a couch, a coffee table, and the most generic-looking hotel painting I'd ever seen. Still, as calming as that room was, I was freaking the fuck out. But there was nothing for me to do at that point. No harebrained schemes could make me magically phase through the wall. I was stuck there, and I sure as hell wouldn't fight that guy. Didn't take a detective to spot that he was armed. The stress made my stomach act up. I was allowed to use the bathroom, but they kept the stall door open. Then it was straight back the room. I tried frantically to come up with some kind of plan or figuring out some specific turn of the corridor where he wouldn't have a clear shot, but it was useless. There were long, wide open spaces and no harsh corners. But that was my mindset. I was still under the impression that there was something I could do, but in reality, I couldn't. Once that started to dawn on me, I realized how screwed I was. It was the emotional equivalent of sinking into a deep black ocean. It was late afternoon when the door opened. Having spent most of the day napping on the couch and anxiously wandering back and forth, I got on my feet like a soldier. One of the guards coaxed me outside. I could tell something was up. People were rushing past us, speaking into their earpieces. We moved in the opposite direction, but I caught a glimpse of a well-dressed group of people used as human shields for someone very important. I was quickly ushered along. I was taken through the hotel kitchen. They'd cleared out the staff. They took me to what looked like an abandoned old walk-in freezer. I was pushed inside and the door was closed. I don't know how those walk-in freezers are supposed to work, but this one locked from the outside. There were no lights, and I could barely make out what was happening through the little windows. I didn't have to wait for long. Just minutes later, I could hear other people entering the room. Some curious, some angry, some crying. One by one, the guests from the previous night were ushered into the freezer. Even the old woman. Well, not all the guests. Only those ripe enough. There were 9 of us in total. Some were mildly annoyed, others were confused. Finally, they dropped a guy who had been beaten straight onto the floor. He was clearly not okay, trying his best to breathe through his mouth. That set most of us off. Some banged on the door, others screamed at the top of their lungs. No one had a phone or a weapon. The panic rose and it spread like wildfire. Soon I was right there with them, screaming for someone to let us out. I screamed, my voice hoarse, but no one came. We must have been in there for at least 40 to 45 minutes. Our protest died, and in the following silence, we heard someone enter the room. A single set of footsteps. They approached, and we all quieted down. I could see the vague outline of a man outside, but our breaths had fogged up the windows on the door. He had a black suit with a blue tie. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching us. I backed away from the door, and others did the same. No matter how bad the freezer was, there was something telling me that this guy was somehow worse. He was too calm, like this was all normal. He'd done it before. As the door opened, we all scrambled to get back. He stepped into the entrance, obscured by the bad lighting. But for all I could see, he was a man. A little shorter than me, a bit round around the stomach, bald, maybe glasses. There was something reflecting off his face. And yet, there was something about him that screamed danger. The man who'd been beaten was ready to roll the dice. He took off running, trying to push past and get out. There was a kitchen exit not too far away. So if he could just make it past this guy, then maybe he'd be in the clear. But no, he didn't get far. The strange man didn't tackle him or attack or scream. In fact, he didn't seem to react at all. But the runner, well, he stopped a few steps short of leaving the freezer. He clutched his throat, gasping for air. The strange man spoke in a raspy, matter-of-factly voice, as if counting the inventory on a supermarket shelf.
Male, 38 years old, 6-year spread reaching a total of 18%, implant through esophagus surgery.
And then there was this ungodly noise. The runner collapsed to his knees. He was trying to scream, but all that came out was a sort of guttural wheeze. It escaped him in waves, involuntarily, until we could see something poking out of his mouth, like the silhouette of a wet branch being pulled out. Finally, there was a snap as it fully dislodged, and the freezer began to reek of blood. He stopped moving. The panic consumed us. I may read calm here in the aftermath, but in that moment, I was an animal. I was scratching on the fucking walls, trying to get back. I didn't care if I was pushing people to the floor or stepping on someone's head. I was desperate. The strange man spoke again, but this time, his raspy voice seemed better, improved.
Female, 29 years old, 4-year spread reaching a total of 14%, implant through spinal surgery.
One by one, he counted us off. Male, female, male, female. 4 years, 5 years, 9, 8, percentages going up and down. Lung cancer, cornea transplant, dialysis, screams and blood. One by one, being pulled out of the crowd and then pulled apart. I'll never forget the sounds. Small bones sound like carrots when they snap. Bigger ones, and different. The dripping noise as human spillage mixed on the floor. Drops of blood really do sound heavier than water. And with every victim, I could see something shift in our captor. Straight back, deeper breaths, like he was absorbing it all into himself. Taking something back. Harvesting. The sixth person on the chopping block was me. He read it all out loud.
Male.
He began.
31 years old. 24-year spread reaching a total of 11%. Implant through ulcer treatment.
My stomach rumbled, moved, twitched as if coming alive. It wanted to escape me, to break free. It strained against me. I collapsed to the floor, my hands slipping on the blood, seeping into my skin, itching under my fingernails. Then, I felt something move in my pocket. I almost dropped it. I still had my phone battery. I took it out and held it up to my mouth. I could bite down on it, drenching myself in acid or God knows what. My stomach ceased moving, if only for a short reprieve. I looked up at my captor. See this? I said. It'll fuck us both up. But you need it, right? You need me whole? There was no response. I could just see him tilting his head down at me. Yeah, if I destroy myself, you get nothing, right? That's it, isn't it, huh? I placed it between my teeth, ready to bite down like a rabid dog on a juicy bone. He didn't move as I got up. We circled one another. He wasn't about to let me go. He wasn't looking me in the eyes. He was staring intently at my stomach. He wanted to pull it out of me, to turn it into something else. Or maybe it was part of him all along, something coming home.
No,
He said.
it ends.
He reached out a hand for me, and I bit down without hesitation. To my surprise, there was just a little puff. But that was it. The battery tumbled to the floor, useless. The man instinctively recoiled, but upon seeing that there was no danger, it all came back with a vengeance. The pain was immediate and incredible. Something in me moved, and I immediately spat up a small glob of stomach acid. Then, the battery exploded. It wasn't a big explosion, just a loud bang. Like the starting pistol of a race. I slipped and slid my way out of the freezer, and had to make a split-second decision. I could close and lock the door behind me, effectively sealing him and everyone in there, or I could leave the door open for others to escape. But it wasn't really a choice. Not really. It never is when you get pushed into something like this. I slammed that door shut and let it auto-lock without even thinking about it. Perhaps he'd asked the guards to clear out, I don't know. But there was no one else in that kitchen. I grabbed a knife from one of the counters, burst through the exit door, and disappeared into the night. My stomach stirring like a restless animal, but settling as I got further away. I can only regret what happened to those left behind. It still makes my fucking spine itch. A police patrol found me wandering the streets about an hour or two later. I can't imagine it looked good. I was taking such small, shallow breaths, and I was still clutching a kitchen knife. Not to mention, I was covered in blood. They were convinced that I'd killed someone, but I surrendered willingly and eagerly. I tried to tell a coherent story, but they just didn't understand me. I probably didn't make much sense. A shower and a fresh set of clothes later, I explained my experience at the hotel to the best of my ability. Sadly, it didn't really do much. There were no records of the man I'd described ever visiting that hotel. As for the missing people, those I claimed had been murdered. They had checked out one by one at different hours the day prior, according to hotel records. They might be missing, but there was no indication of foul play. Yeah, I'm calling bullshit on that. So yeah, that was by far the worst time of my life. Looking back at it, it feels unreal, like it happened to someone else. But even now, I can still get little flashes of something that reminds me of that night, and it just pulls me right back. It never really leaves. Whoever that man was, he was important enough to get a whole company to cover for him. I'm sure not all of them knew why they were doing it, but they were complacent. I think we're looking at someone with a lot of resources and a lot of reach. I never got a name, and seeing as how he seemed to change with every victim he consumed, I can't really tell what he looks like anymore. Not even his age or length or weight. There are, surprisingly, some real records about a small tribe of people from the Blue Hill in the Scandinavian mountain range. There isn't much out there about them, just a mention that they worshipped immortal mountain spirits. Others say they worshipped devils. It's a mixed bag. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what I saw, but I am living with the knowledge that a part of me, something inside me, isn't my own. It moves with me. It lives within me. But at the snap of a finger from that thing, and it will rebel. It will fail me. And I'm just at, 11%? What happens when I reach 50? Nuru? I decided to post this today after getting a video ad that I could never have anticipated. It seems that this company is still in business, advertising their new generation of DNA tests. I'm sure some of you out there have seen it. 20 seconds, unskippable. Smiling faces, distant families being tied together by CGI blue ribbon. I think they have some of those damn sunflowers in the background, still colored that basic company blue.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man looking to relocate for his job gets an apartment with an interesting landlord. So, no matter what you say or do, they will never leave their homes.
I want to tell you about the most turbulent time in my life. There was a 3-month period where my world crumbled. The woman I was going to marry moved to Europe to pursue higher education. My father passed away from a sudden illness, and the imports company I worked for got uprooted and moved southwest to Cairo. I had no choice but to take what little life I had and follow the company. I signed up with an agency to help me find a place to stay. I had to get something fast, or risk losing my job. It wasn't all bad, though. By staying with the company when almost half the staff left, I had an increased seniority. I was reassigned to help with foreign contracts and overseeing customs agreements, meaning a lot of late-night phone calls and video conferences with people in distant countries. I was busy keeping my head above water. I tried to sleep as little as possible, as my heart hurt whenever things got too quiet. I devoted myself to my work, hoping my intrusive thoughts would quiet down over time. Because if they didn't, well, that was hell on earth. I was lucky. There was an opening for an apartment on short notice. The rent was surprisingly cheap, and it was a nice neighborhood. There was a notice about there being an adjoining shop downstairs, but that it had limited opening hours and the rent was cheaper to compensate. I looked over the floor plan and couldn't find anything to complain about. 2 rooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a storage closet. It was all I needed. No one seemed to have anything bad to say about the owner either. Now, I could have signed up for a look at the apartment before I signed the lease, but I was afraid that I might lose my spot in the queue. It was a very attractive deal, both location-wise and rent-wise. To find a place like that on such short notice is almost unheard of. The agency I'd used was equally surprised.
This never happens.
One of them told me over the phone.
At the end of the day, it's up to you. But I can promise you that lightning won't strike twice.
So, yeah, I took it. The apartment building didn't really stand out. It was 3 floors tall with a smooth red exterior, white arched windows next to shaded balconies facing away from the sun, a little shop on the corner, and a set of ornate glass double doors leading to an entryway. There had been a couple of abandoned building sites on the way there, but this building was situated at the edge of a residential area, overlooking a pristine field of grass. It was beautiful. There was a bronze plaque hanging above the door. It was old by the looks of it. I bring you respite in the house of rest. That was a name I'd heard in passing. The building had an address, like everything else, but the locals seemed to refer to it as the House of Rest. I liked the sound of it. The entry was lined with beautiful handcrafted hexagon ceramic tiles. The floor must have been cleaned recently. I could almost see my reflection in it. There was a smooth breeze blowing through the hallway, and it's as if all the hustle and bustle of the city stopped at the closing of the doors. It was quiet, so refreshingly quiet. The agency had given me a key to the mailbox, which is where I got the keys to the apartment. I was up on the 3rd floor. There was no elevator, but I figured I could do with some exercise. Good for the legs. There was a total of 16 apartments in the House of Rest. 6 on the bottom floor, 6 on the middle floor, and 4 on the top. The top apartments were a bit smaller, but were rumored to have the best view. The mailbox already had a piece of paper sticking out, an advertisement for a local restaurant. I could see the same blue-tinted paper sticking out of all the other mailboxes as well. I brought it along, figuring I might as well check it out someday after work. I didn't know anyone in town, but that wasn't going to stop me from celebrating a little. I opened the mailbox, got my keys, and went up to my apartment. I didn't see anyone when I went up there, but I could hear them. People laughing, someone playing the piano, a jingle from a radio playing in a distant room. It was lively but not intrusive. I quite enjoyed it. Made me feel a bit less alone. Going up to the 3C apartment, I was a bit hesitant. I figured maybe it was all too good to be true. Maybe this was where the scam revealed itself. But no, I was wrong. It was wonderful. Bright open spaces with a view of the grassy field on one side and the bustling street on the other. An old-fashioned kitchen, much like the one I grew up in. The apartment was clean, well kept, and there was a perfect corner space for my at-home office. I couldn't have asked for a better space. I could breathe a sigh of relief. Things were finally going my way. It took me a couple of days to get things up and running. I got some new furniture and carpets. I explored the neighborhood and tried the restaurant from the flyer. They had an amazing hawashi. Heaven. I could get most of my necessities from the corner shop. They were only open for a few hours every day, but the prices were low, and there was a discount for residents. The same old man tended the store every day. He must have been in his 70s, but he always had a smile on his face, and was so used to handling money that he could hand out exact change without looking at the bills. All in all, it was shaping up to be a great place to live. It really encompassed its namesake, the House of Rest. My mother was very traditional, and I was raised with certain practices. Now, I'm from a younger generation and a lot more flexible, but there are traditions and customs that I adhere to. For example, I attend a mosque for the Maghrib prayer, and I take some time out of my week to leave for the Jumu'ah. I couldn't look my mother in the eye if I didn't, but it's also a comfort that I've grown accustomed to. It's a part of me. The first Jumu'ah I attended in that neighborhood surprised me. I saw no neighbors leave the House of Rest to attend, so I first thought they might attend somewhere else. I asked one of the other attendants, but they weren't sure. They didn't know anyone who lived there, except for the shopkeeper. People can have a lot of reasons not to attend, but that man had said something unusual, that he didn't know anyone who lived there. These were people from the neighborhood. How could no one know who lived there? Now I was still settling into things. About 2 weeks passed, and I got into a comfortable routine. I had everything I needed, and no one bothered me. Sure, work was a hassle, but with the low rent I was paying, I could work less hours if I wanted to, and still make it through the month with a bit to save. As the company was restructuring and hiring new people, I got some unexpected time off. This could have been a blessing, but it really wasn't. I had to stop myself from looking up what was going on in the life of the woman I'd lost. There were images and video of her laughing, making friends, learning a new language. It was devastating. Not only because I missed her, but because it made me question my choices. I lay awake at night wondering if I should have dropped everything and gone with her. But instead of dwelling on it, I tried to make the best of what I had. And in that space of thought, my mind kept wandering back to the curious fact of my neighbors. How come no one knew them? And why had I never seen them? I would hear them sometimes. I could hear them talking, laughing, cooking. They were there, behind the closed doors. But they were there. I was sure of it. I could hear individual conversations if I listened closely, but I didn't want to be rude. At night, walking around outside, I could see light shining from their windows. I could hear them walking around if I listened at their doors. but I couldn't find any names or phone numbers. Their mailboxes just had written addresses. There was no way to tell who lived where. But coming home from the shop on the corner, I noticed something curious. I'd lived at the House of Rest for 4 weeks by then. Walking past the mailboxes, I noticed something blue sticking out. The same flyer for the restaurant that I'd received on that very first day was still there in every mailbox but mine. No one had gone outside to check their mail for weeks. This caused me some concern. I decided to go down to the corner shop to ask the shopkeeper. I figured he'd worked there for years, maybe decades. He must have seen someone at some point. I waited until a couple of kids scurried out, and then I walked up to him. A small TV kept running in the corner, but he didn't pay any attention to it. His eyes were all on me, with an inviting smile. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you know any people in this building?" He looked at me with that same smile, but said nothing. "Excuse me," I repeated. "Do you know them? Anyone?" He laughed a little and offered me a cigarette. I took it. "You don't speak?" I asked.
Little.
He said.
Very little.
He had this raspy old voice, and he pointed to his throat. I didn't press him about it, and instead went outside with him to enjoy my smoke. This man's beard was as ashen as his cigarette, but it fit him somehow. We just stood there for a moment in silence, watching the busy street, people rushing by like the blood of a vein. There was something organic to it, and just stepping back for a moment calmed my nerves. I don't think it was the cigarette. It was the perspective.
Yafiu.
The old man said.
To be.
Yafiu, I repeated. You know him? The old man nodded, giving me a tap on the shoulder. As he went back inside, he looked back at me a final time.
Good man.
Now, I didn't want to just barge in on Yafo, but I figured I'd keep an eye out. I'd never set foot on the second floor. I had no reason to. But I couldn't help being curious about what kind of people my neighbors were. There had to be a reason why so many of them never left. Maybe there was another reason the rent was so cheap. Another week passed. I was getting into a routine where I rarely had to leave home. Apart from going out to pray, I pretty much never left my apartment. The corner shop had gotten some of my favorite food brands, so most food and drink that I wanted could be bought right downstairs. It really became my haven. Going outside and getting bombarded by the sounds of the city grew increasingly frustrating. I still had to leave for in-office work a couple of times per month, and when I did, I longed to get back home. One time, after returning from a long day, I saw a man leaving the House of Rest. He was about my age, but wore surprisingly old-fashioned clothes. I walked up to him, trying to get his attention. He turned to me with a calm demeanor, his hands open. "Are you Yafo?" I asked.
"Yes, that's me,"
he said. "The old man at the corner told me you live here," I said. "I just moved in, so we're neighbors."
"A neighbor?
He smiled.
What a blessing. Come, dinner's on me."
There was no way to say no. I could tell he wouldn't accept it. And besides, this was the first neighbor I'd spoken to. I had to know more. Yafiu told me he'd lived in the House of Rest with his wife Rashida for years. He was originally a repairman, but he'd sold his business for a hefty profit and was technically in between jobs. But there was no hurry.
"With rents this cheap, I can live off that sale for years,"
he said.
"I only do some extra work on the side when I want to get Rashida something special."
"What about the others who live there?" I asked. "Do you know any other neighbors?"
"No,"
he said matter-of-factly.
"We all keep to ourselves. It's our piece of heaven. No need to bother it."
"It really is a house of rest," I said. "It really is."
"We're very blessed."
Before we went our separate ways, there was one question I'd forgotten to ask, so before we said goodbye, I turned to him. "I have to ask," I said, "what were you doing today?" He turned to me with a cheeky smile.
"I must confess I have a vice,"
he said.
"I get a bottle of red wine for my wife, and I get a pack of smoke. The good brand, not the cheap stuff from the store. It's my one indulgence, I swear."
"So that's it? A bottle and some cigarettes?"
"Don't underestimate the little things,"
he said.
"They are the best and the worst things in life."
There wasn't much to say about that. He had a bottle he'd brought along, a fancy brand that he'd gotten from downtown. As Yafo turned to leave, he looked back a final time and waved.
"If you smoke indoors, sit at the open window,"
he said.
"You can't smoke inside, but they don't check the open windows."
As he wandered off, I assumed he was talking about the owners, but that was another thing. I'd never met them either. But what did he mean by them checking the windows? Who did? When? In the late hours of the night, when I was working at my office desk, I would think about that. What did Yafeo mean? Was it just a friendly reminder to keep the apartment in good shape? Or was it something more literal? I couldn't tell. Were the owners that strict? I tried to go and talk to him a couple of times, but he never opened the door. I figured he was busy or out doing something, but without a clear answer, my mind was left wandering. So in a sudden lapse of judgment, I decided to challenge this thought head on. So one night, I stood by my closed window and lit a cigarette. Now, I can't say for sure what I was expecting. I don't think I was expecting anything at all, really. Maybe someone would ask me to put it out. But no, nothing happened. I was a bit disappointed, really. But as I turned to flick the ash off, I noticed something. The soothing breeze turning to an icy sting. The flavored smoke in my mouth turning sour. There was this warmth on my shoulder, as if someone was looking at my neck. I could feel my heart skip a beat, as if something was judging me from afar, like I was about to get scolded like a frightened child. I stepped away from the window, hastily putting away the rest of my cigarettes. Imagination or not, I couldn't explain that sense of unease, as if breaking the rules wasn't just something frowned upon, but a fundamental wrong. Then footsteps. It was loud and fast, coming down the hall. The other tenants had been sleeping for hours, and yet they somehow seemed even more quiet. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I didn't dare to move. Something in the door cracked as a great weight pushed against it, making the hinges creak. I took a few steps forward, waving my hands as if to clear the air. "I'm sorry," I called out. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again. I'm throwing them out. I'm sorry." The creaking stopped. I just stood there, watching, waiting for the footsteps to continue. Then, the hinges creaked again as the weight pushed off the door, and someone retreated into the building. I couldn't unlearn this. There was someone in that apartment building watching me. While the house arrest was an amazing place to live, I couldn't stay with that kind of pressure hanging over my head. I reached out to the agency about getting a new place, but they warned me it could be a matter of months. So for now, I had to keep my head down and hope for the best. After that night, I would notice little details around the building. For example, there were drag marks on the tiles of the top floor by the stairs, leading to the roof, as if someone had pulled something heavy. The locks on the mailboxes were all a bit frayed, which didn't make sense to me. There were still these blue papers sticking out of them. If someone checked these mailboxes so frequently that the lock was getting janky, why didn't they remove the flyers? And finally, there was the basement. It's not uncommon to lock the basement of an apartment building to keep nosy tenants from messing with things they shouldn't. But there was a drainage slit in the floor, as if ready to clean up large amounts of liquid with a spray hose. So, while my life continued, it did so with a tinge of doubt. I was anxious. I still kept to my schedule of working at night and attending prayer. But I wasn't feeling that same sense of calm anymore. I was anxious about going home. I didn't know what to expect. I decided that I ought to try talking to my neighbors again. For real this time. I needed answers. And if I couldn't get them, I would leave that place come hell or high water. So after Jumu'ah, I went home with the intent to go door to door. So I did, floor by floor. I could hear them. Different voices doing different things. Talking, eating, listening to music. But as soon as I knocked, they went quiet. No one came to open, not even Yafeo. I wanted to go back to my place and close my eyes to the whole thing, but I couldn't. I couldn't pretend like there was nothing going on. So I checked the floors again for something drastic. I found it on the top floor of the building, a fire alarm. I pulled it. I had to get people out of those apartments, and I had to know what was going on. I was a bad neighbor, but if this continued, I wouldn't be a neighbor at all. But the alarm did nothing. It was disconnected. So, while this building was in pretty good shape, it was old-fashioned. It had a sort of grimy PA system in place, with speakers lining the hallways. Looking around on the bottom floor, I found a white side door leading to a supply closet with the PA system controls. I couldn't help but notice how well used the cleaning supplies were. There was even a garden hose for spraying away liquid of some kind. I turned on the PA system and heard it crackle to life. It was old, but functional, if barely. I had to click the button a couple of times to get it to work. And as a first test, it only picked up every third syllable or so. My voice barely carried through the old wires, coming out as a distorted, crackling mess. But after a couple of seconds of adjusting and holding the cable at just the right angle, it worked. "Please exit the premise," I said. "You need to leave your apartment. This is a temporary measure." I didn't recognize my voice, and it carried so slow that I could hear myself on the floors above. This had to do the trick. If this didn't work, nothing would. I hurried up to the second floor. Every door was closed, and it was quieter than usual. Then, one by one, the doors would open. Doors clicked and swung open tentatively. Careful eyes looked outside, scanning the premise for answers. There was Yafeu, of course. Next to him, his wife Rashida. But there were others, too. Beautiful young couples, some with children. Each and every one of them a picture-perfect couple or family. And all of them as healthy and well cared for as you could hope for. They started walking out into the hallway. I could hear the same happening on the floor above.
"What's going on?"
Someone asked.
"Is there a problem?"
"Do we need to leave?"
Another asked.
"He said we shouldn't leave."
"I don't want to leave."
Someone added.
"Please, don't make me. Please."
The PA system crackled again.
Return to homes. Turn to home. Go back inside. Go back inside.
I couldn't tell if the distortion was from the voice of the speaker or the struggling electronics. But people weren't sticking around to get an answer. A heartbeat later, they threw themselves back into their apartments. The final face I saw was Yafeu, apologetically closing and locking his front door. I hurried up the stairs, rushing towards my apartment. Something was moving downstairs. I could hear footsteps rushing at full speed, hot on my trail. I didn't look back. I just hurried back to my apartment, grabbed my keys, and slipped. The keys sailed across the hallway, landing somewhere in the harsh shadows of a sharp overhead light. And someone joined me in the hallway. The old man from the shop. His back was straighter, and he looked taller. I just looked at him, not knowing what to expect. Then he spoke. It was the same raspy old voice as I'd heard down in the shop. But there was something else to it. It wasn't just a tired old voice. It was something deeper. It wasn't just a sick man. It was something inhuman, struggling to find speech in something not designed to talk. And as his eyes reflected in the dark, like a cat on the hunt, he spoke again.
You.
I rushed forward, grabbing my keys. He ran towards me. Not just a brisk jog, but a full-on sprint. I could never have anticipated how fast he was. I fumbled with the keys as they stuck to my sweaty palms, and I barely got back inside before he got to me. I closed the door but didn't get a chance to lock it. Before my fingers could reach, the door burst wide open, leaning off its hinges. The old man was tall enough for his head to reach the ceiling, but it wasn't a normal height. It was something unnatural about his proportions. As his neck extended, his head brushed against the ceiling and bent backwards at a breakneck angle, as his limbs grew elongated and boneless. His head leaned backwards, as if looking backwards, but the body never turned away from me. His arms, now longer than my entire body, pushed me across the room, breaking my kitchen table as I bruised my tailbone.
You defy sanctuary.
It spat.
You defy rest.
With a single arm, it pulled the oven out of the wall and grabbed the live wire connecting to it. Without skipping a beat, it pulled on the wire, ripping it straight out of the wall while still connected. It sparkled and popped in protest as he moved closer.
You were hurting.
It continued.
You were ready.
It stabbed the wire past me and into my workspace, bursting my computer wide open with a violent bang. It was so hot that one of the windows cracked.
This will not fall into ruin.
It growled.
It is no house of flies.
With its free arm, it grabbed my shirt, pulling me up to my feet. I was choking on my own spit as I looked into a shapeless, flesh-like void. As the old man's skin came apart, all that was left underneath was a strangely textured dark, like a walking night.
This will not corrupt.
It growled, pulling me closer.
It is no house of lies.
With the last bit of air in my lungs, I wheezed out what words I could. It's a house of rest, I whispered. Sanctuary. Home.
Home.
It repeated. It poked a long finger into my chest, and I felt my breath turn cold.
Where heart is...
Something ached in me. Something terrible and deep, like my nerves turning upside down. It forced my eyes back into my skull, as if I was trying to look at my own spine. As I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, it was gone. Thundering footsteps disappeared down the hall, leaving me with a pounding bruise on my chest. I tore my shirt open and looked for bleeding. There was a massive bruise that reminded me of a sunflower, right over my chest with a thumbprint in the middle. By morning, that bruise would have turned a sickly blue. Minutes later, I got back on my feet. I stumbled into the hall and down the stairs. I almost tripped on my own feet. But by the time I got to the bottom floor, that bruise was burning me, and with every step I took closer to that front door, it burned even more. I could feel my pulse skipping a beat and changing pace. There was a twist in my stomach as my lungs contracted, spilling out a mouthful of blood on the pristine floor. I could challenge it and press further, but I would die, so I didn't. Turning to go back upstairs, I'd see the old man standing at me from the basement door, observing me, not saying a word, just clutching a garden hose to clean up the blood from his precious floor. The next morning, the old man came to my apartment. He fixed the walls, the door, everything. He brought along some groceries and a brand new work laptop, the same kind they used at the office. I have no idea where he got it from or how he knew where to get one. He had the oven hooked up by dinner time. I noticed how he never once reacted to hearing the adhan, the call to prayer. He didn't even look at me twice when I brought out my prayer mat. He just kept working. I didn't know what to do. I could ask someone for help, but I was afraid of what would happen if I left. There was something inside me that didn't want me to leave, and I'd never heard of anything like it before. But then again, even if I left, where would I go? What would I do? I could see why everyone stayed inside. It was easy. The old man would come up with groceries, and he would get you anything you asked for. A new computer, a phone, fresh fruit, anything you might need to keep yourself calm and controlled. So for about a week, I stayed in the house of rest. I didn't leave for the Maghrib as I used to. I didn't leave for Jamua. I didn't have any hawashi at the restaurant down the street. I stayed inside, praying for guidance. It was the most gilded cage you can imagine. It was so simple to let yourself be trapped. All you had to do was accept that this was as good as it would get. But I couldn't accept it. I just couldn't. That place may have been perfect, but I wasn't. Every day, I would roam the halls. I'd walk up and down, looking for answers. And every time those footsteps came back, I'd hurry back inside, like nothing had happened. I wouldn't tempt fate, and I wouldn't attempt to leave. I would play by the rules, which made me think of Yafu. I managed to catch him leaving his apartment once. He looked displeased to see me as he leaned back against his front door.
You made him mad,
he said.
Bad idea.
But you can leave, I said. How can you do that?
He lets me,
he said.
It's only a small indulgence. A little wine, a pack of smokes. There's a trust. I've never had the urge to escape, so he doesn't care.
And you're accepting this? I scoffed. You want this, Yafu?
I have everything I need.
He smiled.
I'm sheltered. I'm in love. My belly is full. This is the answer to my prayers. Isn't it yours too?
I thought about it. In many ways, yes. If I stopped working altogether, the old man would still let me stay, I was sure of it. I'd still have food on my table. Hell, I'd probably have shows to stream on my laptop. And judging by the other people who lived there, he would keep me happy and healthy for as long as he could. Maybe he could even keep me young, like the others, as time passed. But there were things he couldn't heal, and there were things I didn't want to surrender. Not yet. I can't stay, I admitted. I will die. Yafel looked me up and down. There was something resolute in his expression, an understanding. Perhaps in the way we were different, could he see my pain? He walked up to me, handing me one of the fancy cigarettes from his pack.
Then remember what I said when you smoke.
Yafel whispered.
Open the window. He doesn't check an open window.
I'm not interested in...
No, my friend. Listen.
He repeated.
He doesn't check the open window.
That night I opened the window and lit my cigarette. I took in the bustling sounds of the city and leaned out. It was a long drop from the 3rd floor. My heart was pounding, but not like it had when I tried to leave on the 1st floor. Yafi was a genius. This thing didn't expect me to climb out a window. Maybe it was so rigid in its rules and regulations that it couldn't fathom the window being used as an exit. Couldn't imagine what it would be like to break rules. Using a bedsheet, I leaned out. I was having second thoughts. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't tell why. Was I dying or just deathly nervous? I felt around with the sole of my left foot, trying to find a grip. But no. The exterior was a smooth red. There was nothing to grab. Instead, I settled on dangling out the window, clinging to that bedsheet for dear life. At some point, my hand slipped. I fell and smacked the corner of an arched window, sending me into a roll. I hit the ground at an angle, bruising 2 ribs and knocking my shoulder out of its socket. But I was alive, screaming, but alive. I could hear the crackling of the PA system from the house as a furious scream curled over the airways. I could see the lights of my apartment go on and off. I heard glass and wood break as something tore through it. People were gathering on the street, thinking there'd been a brawl, that I'd been thrown out of a window. Someone was filming, another was calling for help. As they carried me away, I saw the shadow of an old man linger in the open window. And on the floor below was Yafel, raising a lit cigarette at me. Other tenants joined him from their own windows, looking out at me with pity, shaking their heads, shedding a few tears. They weren't angry, they were mourning. And in a flurry of emergency services, pain, and raised voices, the house of rest disappeared from my sight. I haven't been back since. I never knew who to talk to. Everyone who I thought would listen had nothing to say. I learned quickly after talking to my family that my story sounds mad. I've tried to soften it, to say that the landlord was abusive, but they couldn't make sense of it. Then why did you stay so long? They'd ask. And wasn't he just an old man? You have to look at it for what it really is. You have to hear and believe the full story. That's why I wanted to talk to you here. One of few places where I think a voice can be really heard. But I'm not going back, and I never will. The bruise on my chest has long since turned into little black strings. Most of the time, it just looks like roots, but it flares up sometimes. When it does, the surrounding skin gets this mild tint of blue, like the image of a strange sunflower. I can also kind of see it in the cold. It's like it's always there, waiting just under the skin. Not too long ago, I reconnected with my lost love in Europe. I think she might have been what kept me from being complacent in the house of rest. And I'm so grateful for it. Without her, I wouldn't have seen the cage for what it was. She says she misses me too. And in a couple of weeks, I'll be going abroad to be with her again. But I wanted to share this story before I go. I wanted to talk openly about it this one last time, and then never again. Because even now, I can't help but think I might have made a mistake. That I might have turned away something that could have been perfect. That if I'd only stuck to the rules and kept my head down, maybe everything would have worked out. But then I get that ache in my chest, and I can't tell what it is. It might be the threat of something vast and inhuman claiming me as its own. Or it might be a heart that I willingly give.